Hey everybody, John here. Welcome back to the secret sides of Catbird Hill. So ever since we started the channel, years ago, I've gotten emails and comments from people who have been asking to show more of the property. And a lot of what you folks have seen on most all of the videos we've done so far is only probably about a quarter to a third of our total property. We have about 10 acres and it's a really unusual property. It's a narrow property, but it's very long, and it, as is typical of a lot of farmland, former farmland property that was divided and sectioned out over hundreds of years, literally, it becomes really unevenly shaped. So I'm standing here kind of toward the back half of our property, and we're standing right in front of the creek, which flows all the way through our property, basically along its length. And I'll explain in a little bit what this concrete structure is here. But basically this creek historically was actually, the water from this creek was actually used to power two different mills that were on the property back in the late 1700s, early 1800s. There was a grist mill, the remnants of which we still have. We actually still have the foundations of that mill. And then there was actually also a sawmill. So both of these mills were powered by water through water wheels that turned and had all the mechanisms. And a really good close friend of ours, an older gentleman who was born and raised in this area, he actually has a lot of the original parts of both of those mills, a lot of the gears and the drive shafts and so forth. So it's really cool to see that stuff and think about how, 200 years ago, this property was thriving, producing a lot of product for the people that lived in this area. So I'm going to take you on a little tour here, and we're just going to negotiate our way back to parts of the property yet unseen by most viewers. So we're climbing up a little grade here, and one thing that has happened in the 20 plus years that we've lived here is this side of the property, or this end of the property, has changed dramatically. And a lot of that is due to the water in this creek, which during heavy rain, where we get 2, 3, 4 inches of rain, which we get a couple of those storms each year, particularly in the summertime, the water will actually rise up over this bank here. That's probably about 10 feet from water level to the top. It'll actually come up over that bank and it'll move things. I can tell you this is not a natural occurring object. That's a part of a drainage pipe that somehow broke loose upstream many years ago. And I'll tell you this, when we moved in here, like I said, over 20 years ago, you could only see the outer opening of that drain pipe. The entire rest of the pipe was totally covered. So you can see what happens, how powerful water is and how much soil it removed over those years. And you can see from this tree here, a lot of that root base, the kind of the bottom of the tree is fully exposed now. That was all covered in soil. So a lot of things change, and we've lost trees to just that erosion and the soil not being sufficient to hold the roots. We've actually had a lot of beaver activity back here over the years. We've lost a lot of trees to beavers. So things change. This actually is a wood duck nest box. We have wood ducks here that nest on the property, and they basically look for man-made nest boxes like this, or they will nest in tree cavities, but they'll always do it very close to a water source. So I made this box maybe, 6, 7 years ago, and we just finished cleaning it out yesterday. We filled it with wood shavings. These are the shavings from last year here that we dumped out. And somebody nested in there last year. Either wood ducks will use this or screech owls will use this. So we'll kind of continue on around the bend here. What you're seeing here is a really common plant this time of the year in this part of the country. It's called a skunk cabbage, and it's pretty amazing. The reason it's called a skunk cabbage is that it does stink, but that is something that attracts insects, particularly flies, to pollinate. There's the little fruit head. That'll actually be a little tiny flower in there. But the smell of the skunk cabbage will attract insects, and that's what keeps the skunk cabbage thriving and propagating. You can see it's all through here. It's kind of cool. It really gets to be a large plant, probably 2 to 2.5 to 3 feet in diameter. And then let me show you something else really cool. I'm going to zoom in a little bit and show you these little tiny green plants. So these little leaves here are going to be producing flower stems, and it'll be a little vertical flower stem with a pure yellow sort of downward facing flower for every one of these leaves. And this is I think it's called a yellow trout lily, and it's native to this area. I'll put the botanical name in on the video so that you guys who are interested, you folks who are interested, can research that. But it's a really cool plant. It just totally carpets the ground here, and when these things are in bloom, and this entire area here, which I'll show you, this entire sort of, expanse of ground is totally covered in these little tiny yellow flowers. It's breathtaking. It's really amazing. And they're sort of, protected to some extent. By that time, the skunk cabbages are, their foliage is fully out, and it's kind of almost creating an umbrella over these little tiny native lilies. So it's really a cool thing to see. And what I'll do is when they do bloom, I'm going to try to get back here, and maybe we'll do some shorts or some posts of everything in bloom. So we're just walking along what would be considered the eastern edge of our creek here. And you can just see the whole area is, this path I'm on is just covered with those little yellow trout lilies. Okay. So a little bit more of a distant view here. So the creek and our property continues down here, and it sort of meanders, around a little grassy shoreline there. The creek's probably about, maybe 30 to 40 feet wide here. This is one of the wider portions, and the water here is generally very still. We don't have any rocks or anything that's creating a turbulence or a little mini waterfall. Hope you can appreciate that, just seeing the reflection of some of the trees. That gives you an idea of how still the water is. So this is the area where typically we've seen beaver, wood ducks, Canada geese also nest back here. The other thing we have here, we're really fortunate, and Beth and I see them almost every year, are mink. The mink tend to hang out along the edges of the water. I'm not sure where they build their little homes. You might be able to see there's an opening over here. I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's beaver, but it's just really cool. The amount of wildlife, the diversity of wildlife here is really something that we never take for granted. And we have other interesting things that occur. This is just a little tributary draining in here from higher ground up there. Again, when we moved in here, this area here was totally solid, sort of level with that. But you can see what's happened over time. Water force coming through there knocks down soil. Most of the green you see over here is the nasty multiflora rose, which it's just a terrible invasive. And every 5 years or so, I come back here with the brush cutter blade mounted on the weed trimmer and just try to take down enough to get a walking path through. But it's just absolutely beautiful. You know, we are so blessed, so fortunate to have what I would say inherited this property, you know, kind of becoming the next stewards of it. So, you know, a lot of these trees here are cherries, some maples. There's actually a dead ash tree back here, you know, one of the many. But it's just so peaceful back here. Our neighbors in the back have a farm. You know, we have kind of the rolling, you know, green hills back here that you can see off in the distance there. But it's just peaceful. When we come back here, basically all we ever hear are birds. Just real quickly, here's some evidence of beaver activity. This is a little bit older because you can see it's discolored, but the beaver have clearly had some fun gnawing away. This is kind of the size of stuff that they like. This is actually what would be considered a spice bush, which grows all over the place around here. It's a native shrub. And the spice bush is actually, I don't know if you can see it, hopefully you can. If you see sort of a yellowish hue to those shrubs over there, that's called Lindera benzoin. That's the botanical name for spice bush. And this time of the year, it just casts this very airy yellow around. But for some reason, the beaver really love that. It's just the right size for them to get in their, you know, mouth, and when they get a stem off of there, and they can work on building their dam. So we're kind of back to where the video started. The extent of where I walked down here was probably about 300 or 400 yards. And then we're back to this huge hunk of concrete that just seems to be, you know, lying across the middle of the creek. And I'm standing on the rest of it right here. And I want you to notice something. So you can pretty much see how this portion of the concrete that I'm standing on was once attached there. And this concrete wall represents what was a dam. So I had mentioned earlier that this creek actually supplied the water to power a couple of mills on our property. So this was the dam that had been constructed in the late 1800s, and you know, this dam actually ran all the way across the creek, sort of, you know, in the path that you see it here, and connected over there. And the water would be dammed up on this side behind it, and it was diverted into a hollowed out gully over here, kind of over on the other side of this ridge, which is probably about, maybe 4 to 5 feet deep, and that runs the whole length of our property all the way up to our road where the mills were. So historically what happened is they built the dam, the water rose up, and it was diverted over into what would be called a mill race, and that actually powered the wheels for the sawmill and the grist mill. So it's really a cool piece of history. Our neighbor who grew up here actually remembers when this was dammed up, and this water level, of course, would have been really high. Kids would come here and swim. They would tie ropes onto the trees at that time and swim. You know, the water was probably, maybe 10, 12 feet deep at least, and they would swing from the ropes and jump in and swim. It sounded like an amazing time to be around here. But we're really fortunate to have this as an artifact. And over time, obviously what happened, probably with, you know, shifting of the ground and just storms and so forth, it just collapsed. It sort of, you know, imploded here. But, you know, they actually had over here, a foundation of stone. So this was actually built on a foundation of stone and some massive pieces of stone. And I'll show you where that stone came from. I just wanted to show you a little closer view before I cross over the creek again, just to kind of see what the dam looked like. And this stone wall actually runs about 300 yards that way, and that's the eastern extent of our property. It kind of ends, the end of the dam wall is actually marking the end of our property over in the horizon there, we're past those trees. So we might as well come along the creek as I cross here. You'll get to see how steady I am on my feet. If I go down, you'll know what happened. So we're crossing here. You can see what happens. You know, this is just, you know, tree branches and, you know, trees that have come down. These are massive trees that have been here for years, and they were just carried by the force of the water. So we're coming over now onto the western bank of the creek, and you can see just the size of some of these stones. And again, when we moved here 20 years ago, these stones weren't all here. You know, the water has actually carried a lot of this from upstream, up that way. So I'm standing here in the middle of what we call the quarry. So this is an area directly opposite from the dam that I showed you. And as you can see, hopefully behind me, you can see the upper edge of the ridge here. That's, you know, really what, that would be the ground level above the creek. At some point in time, we're pretty sure that historically, they excavated this whole area to take stone out. And I'll show you an example. These are the types of stone that was probably quarried from this side of the creek. And there actually are, it's hard to see now because there's a lot of debris, but sometimes, you know, especially if before the leaves fall, you can see some exposed stone that would have been here. So they literally built the dam from stone that they just dug out of this area. And obviously they chose an area where they found some stone and it was close to the creek and probably convenient, didn't require a lot of hauling of the stone for any distance. You know, this, as I always tell people, we're always dealing with trees coming down. So that's been here for a while. But anyhow, this, you know, where I'm standing from, you know, basically my feet up to the top of that ridge is probably about 14 feet. So they really dug this down pretty extensively to get all that stone out. Pretty cool. Just to give you some perspective, I've climbed up to the top of the ridge. I'm up here now above the quarry, which is down there. And you can see in the distance here, the dam. So I'm really up at ground level on the high side of our property. And you can see how much of a drop off there is down to the creek. Here's some of the spice bush I was referring to. Just really pretty flowers. When you see this, it's got about another 2 weeks or so and the flowers will be gone, but when it's in full bloom, this whole hillside here is just covered in this beautiful yellow. So I'm actually walking right now inside of the mill race. So it's hard to see from probably the camera's perspective or with the camera's perspective. It's probably hard to see that this area here is kind of hollowed out. Let me walk down a little further. I'll try to give you a better perspective, but this is where the water would have been flowing after it had been dammed up and diverted. And you can see the creek is right here. All right. So this water would have been flowing essentially on a straight line toward where our house is and where the road is. So this might give you a little better perspective. I'm standing inside the very middle of the mill race. And again, I said this travels all the way toward the front of the property where the buildings were. And you might get a sense here, you know, I'm at ground level, I'm probably about 4.5 or 5 feet of a bank here, which runs all the way down. Now remember, a moment or so ago, I showed you the perspective kind of at the top of the property, the highest point of the property. So now I've now dropped down. So you can imagine that natural drop from where I was standing to here would have been more than enough of a drop to move that water really fast. And by the time it got to the front of the property where it's dropping off even more, it apparently was roaring. That's what I understand from people who were here back at the time that it was still, you know, an operational an operational mill race. Even though the mills weren't running, there was still water running through here, and apparently it ran through pretty hard. So it's pretty cool how how they did this. I don't know if this was manually dug. I can only imagine that it was. It had to be manually excavated. We're talking about probably from where the mills are, the remnants of the mill near the road, to where that dam is. We're probably talking well over a quarter of a mile, maybe almost half of a mile distance. I can't imagine digging that by hand, but back then that's probably what they did. So more power to them. Thanks a lot for coming along on the tour today. I really was excited to do this. You know, again, number one, in response to a lot of the questions I've gotten from everybody about, hey, can you show us some more? Your place looks pretty interesting, which, you know, thank you for that. But, you know, when you day to day, when you're working on specific things, like a tree comes down and you're just, you know, you're totally taken up with dealing with that problem and all the work associated with it, you forget the beauty that's around you. You know, you're so focused on dealing with some issue that you need to deal with, and then all of a sudden, you know, you have a day like today, which it's, you know, cloudy, it's probably about 45 degrees, there's a drizzle. It's been like this for about 4 or 5 days. I haven't been able to do much on the property, and I thought, you know, this is a great time to get out and just enjoy it, because at springtime, during springtime here, every day it seems to change. You know, there's different plants coming up out of the ground, and you know, the flowering shrubs and trees are popping all over the place. So, you know, I really am grateful to have had the time, even though I always think, gosh, it's, you know, it's raining. I should be, you know, I wish I could do something productive. You know, I think it's important to sort of stop and really appreciate, look around and appreciate what you have that you might be ignoring every day. So thanks a lot for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this. And I'll try to do some more videos as the seasons progress, as we get a little further into spring. Like I said, when those yellow trout lilies start blooming, I want to maybe do a little short of them. It's just absolutely breathtaking. There's just, you know, the natural beauty around you sometimes is just amazing, and I want to share that with you all. So thanks so much for watching. Until next time, John here from Catbird Hill. Take care.